All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar from Unfiltered Media, which is Craft Beer and Brewing and the Brewing Industry Guide. My name is Kate Bernat. I am a contributing editor at both of those publications, and I am very thrilled to share some really excellent experts with you all today. Thank you, everyone, for being here and joining us. We are going to have a rapid fire hour of learning about how smart maintenance can brew sustained operational control in your brewery. Who wouldn't like a little more control these days? Wouldn't that be nice to feel in control of something? This webinar is in conjunction with the folks that you see here today from Highland Brewing, as well as Brightly, which is a Siemens company. I am joined by Russ Robertson, who is Director of Operations at Highland Brewing Company in gorgeous Asheville, North Carolina. Hello, Russ. Benjamin Strahl, Production Maintenance Technician at Highland Brewing Company. And Corey Dickens, who is Principal Solutions Consultant for Brightly, which is a Siemens company. Maintenance is probably an issue that is not at the forefront of people's minds as much as it should be. And then suddenly it is desperately at the forefront of their minds. And so I'm glad we're giving it center stage today. I'm glad it's something that we're going to address head on and get into the real nitty gritty with some practical takeaways that folks who are on this webinar can take back to their breweries and implement pretty quickly. So I do want to introduce the chat function to everyone who is listening. Please feel free to drop questions for our panelists. I will be reviewing those and, where possible, integrating them into our discussion. So please use the public chat. That will also capture comments and questions from folks who are joining on YouTube and Facebook, I believe. So those questions will also get funneled to us. I think it's always good to start these discussions with a bit of scene setting. Maintenance is as old as brewing itself, probably. But why are we discussing this today? Why in end of March 2026 is maintenance the topic on our lips? So Corey, do you want to kind of set the scene? What is it about industry conditions today that makes maintenance kind of a very germane issue right now?
Thanks for including me. I think the hot topic that I started to dig into, it's like every year it's seasonal, right? I think with everyone ramping up production right now, especially to get seasonal beers out or starting to prepare for the next season. But then you also have the changing market, right? Craft has been equalizing out for a few years, especially a hot topic at CBC. Now we're really starting to see the rise of the collectives and the merger strategies, et cetera, right? Like a hot topic right now is Half Acre and the other sister Chicago brewery that merged, right? Even with our clients, right? You have Left Hand, who their parent companies made a ton of acquisitions, Tilray Brands. So all that's moving, which means equipment is changing hands, which means people are either making the decision to continue operations offsite or shut down a production facility and bring it all in-house, which means adding capacity or adding the amount of hands in the cookie jar.
This topic of brewery maintenance in the era of M&A and consolidation is the topic of a few kind of expert articles up at the Craft Beer and Brewing website right now, beerandbrewing.com. So if that's something that, some context that viewers are especially interested in, those articles are also a really great resource and something folks should be checking out. I think I want to start with, not every brewery is thinking about being acquired right now. It's not on everyone's bingo card, contrary to the news cycle. Not every brewery will be acquired or acquire someone else. What's the context for breweries that are not planning that way right now, Corey? Why is this still the webinar they should be sitting in?
You said it. It's not the predominant topic, right? Again, you get brewers together and they start talking about the beer and the flavors and the yeast and all the chemistry stuff until the equipment doesn't support the process to make the beer, package or can the beer, package the beer, sell the beer, right? Keep operating. So it's I've worked in a lot of industries, right? Ben and I both have been in the military. Russ has a background in big beer as well as some other food and beverage spaces. Maintenance isn't what everyone wants to talk about there either. It's the same thing. It's like this forgotten thing until all of a sudden it's the bottleneck in our process. And now we have to figure out how to do it. So again, just talk about things and keep socializing it, and the right people that are in the right mindset will catch on and they'll pay attention. For others, it's kind of a, hey, we tried to tell you.
Well, the problems will make themselves known. So, but the idea is not to get there. I'd like to, on the Highland side, Ben or Russ, I'd like to get some context for kind of what brewing looks like at Highland. What system are most small breweries operating under? And then how have your maintenance systems at Highland evolved? Kind of give us an idea of how you fit size-wise and in terms of your maintenance processes in the larger industry. Give us a sense of scale and context, please.
Sure. Hi, thank you for having me today, Kate. I'm Russ, as you mentioned earlier. Basically, Highland is a large regional craft brewery, and we're not in the M&A discussions. We're not looking, right now for to acquire anything, nor to be acquired. We are in the 40,000 barrel a year range. We have a 50 barrel brew house. And we are large regional craft, family owned, and we love that about our company. I come from, as Corey mentioned, big beer, and then some other space outside of beer, but still in beverage. And it's funny how many things you see out there and how people are controlling their business. A lot of it is Excel spreadsheets. And a piecemeal here and there, and different things work for different folks. But certainly, with technology advancements, we would be doing ourselves a disservice if we weren't looking to utilize technology to the best of our ability to make our processes more efficient and give our folks more opportunity to succeed.
I think there would be an assumption that, as breweries grow, maintenance needs to become standardized. You need SOPs. Maybe when you're smaller, you don't need those. But is that a misconception? When do maintenance practices need to become standardized? And is that always triggered by size of brewery? Or is there some other reason that might, spur you to kind of go from some legal pad notes, scribbles to something a little more standardized?
Yeah, I'll definitely let Ben weigh in on this as well. But in my opinion, the better and more standardized you can be from square one, the better off you'll be long term. If you start putting the right things in place in the beginning, it's a heck of a lot easier as you grow to continue that system and building onto that system, sort of the snowball effect, as it were. Rather than all of a sudden turning around one day and saying, "Uh-oh, now we've got a problem and we need to figure out how to get all these pieces put together."
To add to that, I don't know how it correlates to size, but being a maintenance team of two, basically here, having a standardized process for preventative maintenance, it goes a long way. It's the difference of 5 minutes of work versus an accidental weekend of work, in my opinion. So.
No one wants that accidental weekend of work.
Nope.
Ben and Russ, any unexpected learnings about maintenance in the years that you've been doing this, or wear items? What has most surprised you by taking this kind of structured approach to maintenance? If you could give us an example of some learning.
Yeah, personally, I'm incredibly thankful that my predecessors have put the right things in place that have set us up for success, to the point of what I was saying earlier about it's better to have the system, going in the first place and building, the right way as things grow and increase. I think the folks at Highland have done an excellent job over the years. Our, year before last was our 30th anniversary. And there aren't a lot of folks in craft beer that can say that they've been around for 30 years, doing the same thing and making good beer and that kind of thing. So certainly a testament to the fact that the Highland folks have been doing it well for a long time in Oscar Wong's legacy. I certainly think that all of the technology that we've got and that we've put in place has helped us along the way, and Highland has been open to seeing new things and grabbing a hold of them and really embracing change, but also really holding on to the culture that we've built here. We've had some significant breakdowns, and having the right escalation protocol in place, making sure that we're doing the right things to get that equipment back up in short order has been awesome to see and be a part of while I've been here. We lost a gearbox for the infeed worm on our can filler a couple years ago, and that's one of the most critical pieces of equipment that we've got. The way of craft and the way of beverage in general has been more cans, more aluminum than used to be bottles, and so we're able to hand keg if we had to, and we've got a great bottle line, but without our can filler, we're dead in the water. Whereas something like our automatic palletizer is nice to have for our folks, but worst case scenario, we could have some folks, myself included, standing at the back of the line, hand stacking pallets if that's what we needed to get to the shelf. So having prioritized the how critical the equipment is and what the critical spares are for that equipment and how quickly we could put our hands on that stuff if we have an unexpected failure, really expecting the unexpected is the name of the game.
Did you find the gearbox?
We found the gearbox.
Okay.
They got it to us overnight.
Okay.
And then was involved. Our mighty maintenance team of 2 was able to restore our can line to service with barely over 24 hours of downtime, which was incredible work for a team of our size, and resources.
Yeah. Maybe Corey, could you speak to how breweries can kind of like evaluate that downtime potential and see the time savings when these processes are in place? Can you quantify that, and how do you do that?
You can. Unfortunately, in many of the places I've been in different industries in the role of maintenance, we learn from failure, right? So you ask about like the frequency changes and SOPs, right? Every piece of equipment you buy, it does come with an OEM recommended interval. Those intervals are generally over-engineered, right? Again, you don't know if it's Highland running at 40,000 or a smaller brewery that like just plans for the capacity and runs it at a quarter speed. I like to learn from failure, so I use the 7 questions of RCM to come in to learn from those events and figure out, like, again, a structure around this type of failure for this type of equipment. What are our prevention strategies? How does that impact our business? I hate to bring it back. It's kind of like poker, right? Like you can't always have the edge. Sometimes you have to take a few losses to understand what the game is being played. And then you start making safe, educated bets, and you support that with a structure like they've done. Again, the fact that they're a 40,000, 50,000 regional craft brewer, and they have 2 maintenance people. Again, even Ben was like, that's crazy to me. And the only way you do that is with a structure.
Something, Russ, you had brought up earlier was sort of the difference in priorities between something that is absolutely critical to operations and something that is just inconvenient but could be solved for with other physical labor or other equipment. How do you identify in the brew house what's truly critical versus something that's just kind of, again, inconvenient? How do you make that distinction? And then I'll follow up from there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sitting down and being intentional about and honest with ourselves about what we actually have to run, not what's convenient to have, what we like to have, what's nice to have, but what we actually have to have. And then figuring out, okay, what are the critical things that we need for that equipment? What could possibly go wrong? Seeing it ahead of time, and then evaluating how quickly could we put our hands on that if we needed to, as it relates to spares. So there are high dollar items that we know are absolutely critical to our equipment, like this gearbox that we were talking about that actually wasn't on the shelf. I could also tell you some good examples of things that we did have on the shelf that were critical failures, and we went and pulled it right off the shelf and got the equipment back up and rolling. But figuring out, the availability of those things, do we have a workaround? Is it we classify it as either A equipment, B equipment, C equipment, and then, this is an A spare, a B spare, a C spare. And we'll go through and figure out, okay, if it's A equipment and it's an A spare, we say this is the most critical. Obviously, we'd love to have that on the shelf. Sometimes our resources, dictate that we can't afford to have that thing sitting on the shelf, and we need to wait and buy it, when and if, we had a breakdown. But we need to know ahead of time, okay, the risk is, we may be down 3 weeks if it's going to take some time for us to put our hands on that. Or is there a brewery that we know nearby that we could call and would help us out? Asheville has a wonderful brewing community that really leans on each other quite a bit. And that's always a beautiful thing to see. We get calls from folks, and we call folks when we're in trouble and say, hey, do you have this thing, on the shelf, and could we borrow it for some time and reimburse you? What could that look like? So that's a little bit about how the process unfolds when you sit down and make a plan.
Yeah, that planning piece seems absolutely invaluable and really dictates everything that comes after, right? Then there's just like this beautiful kind of chain reaction of when we have the budget, when we have the ability to, add to that spares library, we know exactly what those priority pieces are. How do you manage spares at Highland? And then maybe Corey, you can speak to how you've seen other breweries do that.
Yeah, I'll let Ben talk about our spares management. I will say, though, there's nothing less comfortable, and anybody who's been in operations anywhere knows that there's nothing less comfortable than not having a plan, than trying to figure it out. So, having done this work up front is an investment, but, making sure that we know, okay, here's what the circumstances have dictated. Now we pull the playbook that we've already got ready for, how this thing unfolds.
So kind of like what Russ said, we kind of evaluate the criticality of spares. Is it one part that one machine has that is probably never going to go bad? Can we order that within an X amount of time? Or is it, a belt that every 3 months will get, shredded or something like that? So we'll keep more of those readily available. Or is it a part that is shared amongst, other machines like a VFD, for example? We'll keep a certain amount of those available. Stuff like that.
Yeah, and then Corey, what are industry best practices if you wanted to have the absolutely most beautiful spares library the world had ever seen? What would that crowning, apex look like to shoot for?
I mean, if you ask any operations or maintenance person, if no cost was a barrier, right, they'd want every spare for everything in an infinite amount of quantity. The issue is these things have shelf lives. These things take up space. Financially, there's a carrying cost to it, right? And for tax purposes, you hate that. I used an acronym earlier, and Russ and Ben both talked about it. So I used RCM. I'll say what that is. It's reliability centered maintenance. It came out of the aircraft industry in the late 60s and early 70s, and it's the basis for how we design equipment. So it's understanding the function of the asset or the system. You, as a group, you talk about how it potentially can fail, what fails, what's the effect of it, what's the consequence to the business, is there applicable prevention strategy? Now you start talking about roughly a cost-benefit analysis. And then you say, okay, if we don't do anything, right, let's just say 70% of the pieces of equipment at Highland, there is no PM plan for, right? 70%, that means they focus their efforts in their human capital and the spare parts capital towards 30% on hand, ready to go. For the 70%, they've gone through an exercise. Who do we get it from? Do we have that documented somewhere? Is it tracked somewhere? So again, if Ben is sick today and someone else is in their stead and they have access, can they look that up very quickly and find that information? That's the biggest thing is here is, again, just reiterating, putting a structure in place, making a very deliberate decision. What do we need? Why do we need it? And how many of those should we have? When you have it, though, I do recommend best practice. I'm a big fan of like 5S or 6S, which is where you like in a storeroom, you would have designated put away locations. You'd even tag it, right? So you'd have a very organized manner for people to go find what they need versus many of the places I've walked into, and I think everyone can agree, you have boxes of things still in the original packaging up on the top of mezzanines that there's no light, right? Or you take off broken things or worn components and put it in the box like, oh, I'll keep that around, right? And it becomes a hoarder's nest. So get rid of the stuff you don't need, keep things documented, and keep it organized.
Those 5S and 6S YouTube videos are very soothing to some strange part of my brain. So if anyone just needs some, afternoon YouTube time, can't recommend those enough. This brings up a good point, which is like the ideals in a perfect world against the reality of, constraints on people and time and resources, which are all very real right now. How granular does Highland get in terms of tracking, maybe not tracking every clamp or little gasket, but what does your tracking look like? And where could a maintenance team of one begin with that?
So, like you said, not every single thing is tracked. It's a little unnecessary. I think you get to a point of diminishing returns when you do that. But if it's in a PM, if it's in a preventative maintenance item, it's tracked. And then, kind of going off what you asked, every single one of our shelves that we keep preventative maintenance items on or critical spares, is labeled, and we reflect that in Asset Essentials as well with the location. That way, if the PM pops up, it tells you exactly what you need, and then you can click on it and it'll show you exactly where it's at. And I mean, the amount of hours that saves over, just a week is phenomenal.
Imagine the case. Imagine they did have a spare one of those gearboxes sitting somewhere, and because it wasn't tracked, again, they pay the money to buy another one and wait for it to come for 24 hours. They're trying to find workarounds for it. By the time it shows up a week later, someone finds a gearbox and you're like, oh, didn't we need this? Right. And now again, to the point of what if that's what if that's been happening for years? What else did you find?
We may or may not have had that happen with something,
That's
anything truly, tell us more.
I don't know what I can say.
Fair enough. But okay, so if a brewery has been kind of operating as a little bit of a one man or woman show when it comes to this, and it's like, oh, I really don't have a good inventory of these things. I don't have an organized system. Things are in shoe boxes on racks. What is that? What is starting to put something in place look like? Where do you begin when you're staring at that rack of boxes?
I'll say again, at the North Carolina Brewers of the North Carolina CBC this past year, we had this conversation. And again, we were kind of talking about CMMSs, we kind of weren't. And some people brought up the good idea. It's like, get a Google OneDrive, build some folders, right? And label the folders essentially like your parts, assets, and PMs like you would in a CMMS. The CMMS just takes it a step further and starts to connect the functions to you. But from like a good, better, best scenario, like spreadsheets is fine, especially we talked about size earlier. I think I found like 2,000 barrels or less. Like it's one person doing this work. You're fine with just using free resources or kind of, Chat GPT nowadays, right? You start to get into the better scenario. Now it's you have an assistant, you're kind of delegating some responsibility. You just want the confidence. You start applying a rough structure to it. Best case scenario, again, you can do all that no matter the size, right? There are still large enterprises to this day that use spreadsheets for maintenance tracking. It does not mean it is a best practice. It just means they've accepted that practice. So if you want to get there, this generally is agreed a best practice to assist in the process. You can't substitute the process. You can't substitute the people. The technology only speeds up what is going to happen regardless.
Yeah, when it comes to sort of the technology side for the Highland crew, where's a specific area that you've really built some consistency into your maintenance routine, and what tools really helped you get there?
Yeah, so I'll talk first about measuring the performance. I mean, I think that's where you kind of need to start to figure out how are we performing. I used to work with a guy who said if it moves, measure it, and if it doesn't, paint it. That's sort of the mantra of making sure we understand how our equipment is functioning. Starting to figure out where our preventative maintenance schedule needs to start. How often on what frequency we need to be putting our hands on the equipment. Is this autonomous maintenance where the technician that runs that equipment regularly is doing the work, or is it something that really requires a little bit more strategy, a little bit more in-depth knowledge of those things, and something that really our maintenance team needs to handle. So building efficiency monitoring systems initially, is absolutely critical to me. We measure our machine efficiency or run efficiency to figure out, are we getting better? Are we getting worse? What are the things that are eating our lunch? Where do we need to go after making improvements? If we haven't identified it, it's pretty difficult for us to throw a dart at a dartboard with a blindfold on and say, hey, we think this thing might help us. So having that system and figuring out how consistent we are with our process is the baseline. And then, continuing to monitor, hey, where do we need to go spend our time and effort? And that really should inform, how our maintenance, and what our maintenance frequencies are and all that kind of thing.
I'll use a quote against Russ here. So if anyone kind of comes from the TPM world, which is where autonomous maintenance comes from, or TQM, Deming had a quote, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. So same thing, like measure what matters. Don't just measure everything, because that's how people will start to understand what you're doing and game the game. So work back, what are we actually trying to measure? Why does this matter? How we're going to measure it, and what action is it going to drive us towards? And you need data to support that.
What are some of those data points that you would suggest breweries be tracking as part of this? What's been really helpful at Highland, or just what are some low-hanging fruit to start with in terms of tracking those?
Yeah, so on the brewing side, we've got a system built called the production yields dashboard. And we're looking at, it's exactly what it sounds like. We're looking at the yields. We're following our recipes. We're tracking by style that we're brewing, and we're figuring out how many barrels of beer are we putting in a fermenter. And are measuring all the analytics and making sure that that it was what we wanted it to be the first time the right way. And over on the packaging side, we're measuring our machine efficiency, and that is identifying where the bottleneck is on the line, figuring out what our constraint is, and then using the V-curve methodology to determine what the speeds of our equipment should be. And then setting a target for 100% efficiency, and then figuring out how did we achieve to that target, and then identifying where are the things that kept us from achieving that statistical process control, as it were, and going after doing the work there to remove that loss from the operation. Oh, you're muted.
I was still muted there. Yeah. What decisions has that led you to make, that tracking led you to make on the maintenance side? Has anything kind of jumped out at you from that data that made you, make a decision, or that changed a course of action for you guys?
Certainly. You want to speak to that, Ben?
definitely more of a Josh thing. You know, I mean, I've even been told by you, you know, before looking at, you know, these efficiency charts of, you know, what a good idea might be, you know, what I think about something in the maintenance line or in the manufacturing line. Can we speed up this conveyor here? Can we do something different in, you know, a packaging process? I mean, we've even looked at like conveyor layouts. You know, is this going to speed this up? How does this affect the total amount of time it takes to finish the entire day's worth of packaging? You know, stuff like that.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, we have to have a target. We have to know what we're expecting to happen. And then we know we've got an issue when that thing didn't happen. You know, on the brewing side, you know, that could be boil times, right? You know, that, you know, we're looking for consistency, you know, in our evaporations, you know, and we want to maximize fermenter fills, you know, and so if something goes wrong in the process, we're tracking the numbers. We say, wait a minute, here's an anomaly. You know, what was this thing, and how can we smooth that out? You know, over on the packaging side, to Ben's point, you know, if we're tracking the efficiency and all of a sudden we have a step change in one direction or the other, you know, we say, okay, what happened? Was it that a conveyor speed changed, or was it that, you know, is it that somebody slowed down the equipment because they thought it looked a little smoother that way? And, you know, and anytime you're dealing with, you know, with operators, you know, like interfacing with the equipment that way, you never know. I mean, people change things, not necessarily understanding the impact that it can have downstream. You know, so that measurement's critical to make sure that we're understanding, you know, and teaching our folks and training them well to understand, here's why this thing is set at this speed, etc.
Yeah, I think a question that I have based on that idea of, you know, getting a team on board with this, consistency of tracking, obviously important. You have to be collecting your data consistently and in a similar way that everyone has access to or everyone can input to. What kinds of actual technology are you using to do this, you know, in the brew house and the cellar? Are there laptops, desktops, iPads, phones? What are people using to track things, and how do you get people on board with that?
The answer is Go ahead, Ben.
I was just going to give one example. So I use an infrared camera, and every month I'll go by and I'll take pictures of all of our electronic components. It'll preventively tell us what's about to fail, and then I'll document all that and kind of like track it. So yeah.
That's really cool. What have you? I don't know. And what do you see when something? What would that show you if something?
I mean, the biggest thing is fuses, capacitors. Sometimes we'll get, you know, you can see them getting near the end of their life. But the biggest thing I keep an eye on is VFDs. Those are if those fail, it's a fun time to replace them and reprogram them.
Over in the brew house and cellar, we're controlling temperatures of fermenters and bright tanks with our, you know, with a control program on a computer, you know, a desktop that our brewers have over there, and that's also where they're entering all the analytics that they're measuring along the way for the brews. You know, our quality department does the same thing. You know, they've got their system, their quality systems, you know, for all the analytics along the way. You know, we've got parts of our process where our folks, both brewers, packaging techs, distro folks, are writing stuff down, you know, on a physical, you know, pen and paper, and then, you know, somebody, maybe somebody else ends up putting that information over into a computer, into a spreadsheet, or that kind of thing. So a little bit of a lot of those things. And I think I heard your question as to how do we get buy-in from folks on that kind of thing. And I think, you know, what everybody wants to know is what's in it for me. You know, what is it going to do for me? Why should I be measuring this thing or, you know, meticulous about looking at what time it is and writing the times down correctly and all that kind of thing? One of my favorite quotes is by Saint Exupéry. He says, you know, if you want to build a ship, don't divide the team up and send them out to start chopping down trees. Teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. You know, it's the buy-in of, hey, you know, here's what good looks like, you know, but like making that inspiration for, hey, if we're making things more efficient, then we have to interface with the equipment less. It's better for everybody. It's going to cost us less money to produce what we're producing. It's going to take less effort from our folks, and at the end of the day, it's going to be tangibly a better day for the person who actually is doing those tasks.
Corey, what is the vast and endless sea of preventative maintenance? What have you seen really like motivate people and help them see that, it's kind of like a delayed gratification, right? Like it's a prevention. 100%. It's not, it's the absence of something bad happening. So it's kind of hard to, I think, like get everyone on a page. What have you seen really work and make that concrete for people?
I'll tell a quick story about when my last job was in textiles and I was the facility and maintenance manager there. And, within 6 months, I had ramped on a piece of equipment that is, made in the 60s and they don't even make them anymore. Right. And it was mechanical. So it was easy to master. Electronics, miss me with that. It's just purely mechanical, like gear turns, then goes good. But we just had these repeat failures, right? I came in, I didn't understand the condition of it. There wasn't a lot of tracking done prior to. It was a small crew. Half that crew had rotated out, right? So there wasn't much tribal knowledge to tap into. There was no 5S parts. Again, the idea about worn parts getting put back in the bin, blah, blah, blah. But it became this thing where everyone thinks of maintenance. You think of these firefighters, right? They swoop in when a downtime event happens and they'll jerry rig it and get it back up and running and they're going to get celebrated. That's only good for so long. And then you get tired of fighting the same fire like in the period, the frequency between failure keeps getting smaller and smaller. The same issue, like bin will come off of a line and then the operator call right back out. Hey, yep, it's broke again. It's doing that thing again. Right. And that's so frustrating. The theme here is we want to be in control. Right? We want to predict things. We want to be a step ahead from a business and operations aspect. You want to minimize what you're not in control of, because if you're not in control, you don't control your cost. And the cost is what drives the business and helps a business like Highland stay around at their capacity, without having to explore buying someone to buy capacity or get acquired by someone. That's how you're able to, sustain success for that long. So the switch flipped for me. Instead of just fixing it once it broke, it was to figure out what I could do to prevent it from failing in the first place. And that is the endless sea. That is, hey, if I prevent this, like my day is planned, I can stick to my plan. I really like my schedule. I like sticking to my schedule. I don't like deviating from it. So when you find those people that think that way, they'll already kind of paint that endless sea themselves, because what's in it for me, as Russ mentioned, is I want to chill out. I want to sit in the office with my feet up watching YouTube, and I want to know that everything is taken care of and I'll knock out my PMs, right? From an operations standpoint, you want to know that like I don't have to justify FTE or sign off on these last minute expenditures. So for me, it was that switch flipping.
It's a really great point. And I mean, to take that from a 30,000 foot view with like where the industry is at right now, I mean, there's some obviously variation in craft beer pricing on the shelf, but like realistically, there are constraints there. You can't just go charging more money for your beer every day. Most breweries are kind of in line with similar size breweries on the shelf or in the tap room. I mean, realistically, your competitive advantage comes from the cost you can control inside your own brewery, because you're not going to be able to pull that pricing lever as much as you might like to. So really, this is kind of, when I think about it from that high level view, we're talking like make or break kind of business and operations control and getting, squeezing those efficiencies and reducing those unexpected costs is something everyone is thinking about these days.
I think the people that have really struggled lately have either just been completely reactive and that cost stacks up for just reacting to everything, or they have tried to be preventive, but they've outsourced it all. They have this guy for this and this person for this and this for this, right? And that, again, without properly managing and doing a cost benefit analysis, like you're not in control of that. And they're going to raise their prices every year, right? Because they know they offer a service that nobody wants to do. Like I work with a lot of like micro nano breweries here in the Raleigh area where I live now. I grew up in Asheville. But like same thing, like they have one guy that kind of like goes around and does like the chiller maintenance for them, right? And you have to control that. And you have to be monitoring or else it catches up.
Mm-hmm. In terms of, measuring the ROI on preventive maintenance or just on good maintenance practices in general, how do you demonstrate that? Because that's part of, getting buy-in from others on your team.
Russ, I guess I'll leave that one to you. How have you done that and been able to maintain only 2 people on the production maintenance staff?
Yeah, I mean, knowing what your overhead is pretty important. What is the cost of doing business? I mean, we got to know how much we're paying in labor, how much we're paying in utility bills, all the overhead that we've got going, how many dollars am I losing a minute that we're not putting a case, in the cooler or on a truck, ready to go out to retail. It's pretty easy to quantify the dollars that we save not having to call in an emergency service tech from one of our equipment manufacturers, right? I mean, those are $15,000-$20,000 for a day's worth of emergency service work. So it doesn't take many of those, avoiding an emergency service call, to pay the salary of a person or two for a year to keep things going in the right direction, and also justify the time and effort spent, actually behind the computer working on getting things inventoried properly, doing the upfront work of figuring out, is this A equipment, B equipment, C equipment? What about the spares? What's absolutely critical? It really justifies doing those things when you can say, okay, well, if we're not prepared with this, here's what we stand to lose.
Are there areas in which you, I don't know, encounter a little more resistance in what you'd like to implement, or where are there real challenges in your kind of plans, and how have you overcome them or eventually created consensus around those?
You won't hear many people say this, Kate, but I am truly, truly blessed to work with the folks that we work with at Highland specifically. In my past life, in big beer and also, over in other craft beverage, I'll say that it was a little bit more difficult, to justify, and to get buy-in, and really have tied up, ROI and still sometimes be told, no, that's not the right thing to do. But our company is family owned. Our folks trust us, to do the right things and to spend money, as if it was our dollar, because it is, that we're putting into these investments. So, I haven't had much trouble getting buy-in, nor has our maintenance team, getting buy-in, from me or any of the members of our lead team, putting the dollars, really where it has the biggest impact for, reducing downtime, and improving efficiency and really removing that loss out of the operation.
Corey, what do you see elsewhere as common kind of stumbling blocks, and how do you see teams overcome those?
I think you have to build a relationship with people and you have to build trust. Again, it seems like both Ben and Russ have walked into an organization where that was a culture that they had fostered well before they showed up. You can't say that's the same for everywhere, right? So it's come in, you have to prove your worth, you got to do X, Y, Z. I was given the green light to start evaluating some continuous improvement projects, from who I thought was a decision maker. And I totally omitted 2 key became roadblocks in that manner that I didn't take the time to build a relationship with, even though I knew this was going to have to go through them eventually. Instead, build a working group, be curious, not judgmental. Don't think you have the answer to everything, and involve other people in the organization, right? Operators. They see that equipment. They stand at that equipment for 8-10 hours a day. You can't tell me there's a thing that functions with that machine that they don't know about. They might not know how to fix it. They may default to Ben on that, but they know what it sounds like. They know what is normal, what's abnormal, right? We have to teach them what the purpose of these things are, like the run rate and center line, but involve them, get their opinion, right? So that's the biggest thing. Just build a relationship and build trust.
That's a really good point, Corey, and especially somewhere where folks have been for a long time. Maybe 10 years ago, they told somebody that something wasn't functioning appropriately, and it didn't before the systems were really well built and that kind of thing. And I think Ben can attest to the fact that what we hear often from folks, whether it's brewers or, packaging techs alike, they'll say, oh, it's always been that way. And it's like, well, why? Why does it need to be that way? We can make it better. Let's go fix it. So asking the question, to your point, to the folks that have their hands on the equipment every day, absolutely critical.
I think bringing in that sort of like human component of this, when staff may be changing, someone who's been there a really long time and is the keeper of this institutional knowledge and knows where those things are. They're in the dusty box on top of the third shelf from the left, whatever. You can't count on people being around forever and just holding those that knowledge in their head. So what are if you're anticipating some, new hiring or departures, where should these things live, and how seamless should that transition be?
Yeah, I think having documented SOPs for the things that are critical are really important. The way we do the things that are important to our business, but also fresh eyes are a good thing. I say to every time we have a new hire in production, I say to them, all right, tell me what you see, because factory blindness is a real thing. If you walk through on your same route every day and you see the same things every day, sometimes you stop seeing things that other people might look at and they say, what is that? What, look at the cobweb in the corner, and I don't see it anymore, and that kind of thing. So, having fresh eyes on things and asking for folks' opinions on how things can get better, I think absolutely critical. But, as long as they're following the process that we have prescribed as the correct process for the way we do business and the most efficient way, tried and true, that we have written in the, in the standard operating procedure.
Yeah,
Ben,
Corey,
I want to ask you, what helped you ramp up when you joined Highland?
What do you mean? What helped me ramp up?
Like, how did you get up to speed? Like, how did you understand what systems were in place and what the procedures were? I believe Asset Essentials are already in place by the time you showed up, right? So, like, what did that onboarding look like?
So I have never been at a beverage industry area ever before here. So I was completely new to these machines. What I did and what my boss had me do was basically work with the floor workers, the packaging operators, right? And I would watch what they did. I would learn the machine and learn how it did what it was supposed to do. And I think that was a huge eye opener to someone who's never seen this type of work before. And like you said, Asset Essentials was here. Luckily, I was not the one to put everything in inventory. I'm forever grateful for that. But I mean, just coming from places that had either spreadsheets, or they would write down on the whiteboard where things were, coming to Asset Essentials where it is now was a breath of fresh air. So.
I mean, do you have any idea of how much more quickly you felt like you were able to get your feet under you because of that, like versus legal pads
fast,
and white?
Yeah, I think very fast. I mean, compared to other places that I've been trained on and have gone through, I think, in my opinion, I think I got a good feeling for this place within a few weeks. Obviously every day I learn more and more, but I think compared to my history, I think I've definitely come around pretty fast here because of the people, the software, everything takes an effect into that.
I'll say in the dirt world, they call this the gray wave, right? All these seasoned construction professionals retiring and just, withering away, going fishing full time, whatever nice thing we want to say about it. But again, it's like people like to teach other people things, right? That's like an innate psychology thing. I like to teach people things. So that's how you engage those people that you're planning on leaving, right? And I think a function of management too is succession planning. It doesn't mean you're going to have a plan for everything, but especially critical operations, critical operators, team leads, et cetera, you need to have a plan. Ben and I come from the military, right? Russ comes from other bigger organizations where this is kind of just a standard practice. Like you have succession planning in place, you have documented SOPs, you have these training pipelines, and it's like regimented. So again, Russ did a really good thing too, or whoever sent Ben down to work with the floor operators is like, he's building relationship. He sees a problem with a new set of eyes that he may be able to do a small tweak and fix. And now they trust him because he's in maintenance. So like, that's the biggest thing is when you get to a point where maintenance is a separate function of, a small brewery, the brewer, the owner does it themselves. Now you have to build a relationship between those two groups. And that's a really cool way to do it.
Yeah, that mutual learning and the, sort of working together towards that common goal with each other's expertise where everyone feels like this is a mutual solution. Like I respect the work that you've been doing. Here's some of my background that feels applicable to this particular operational problem. Ben, do you recall any early suggestions you made? Those fresh eyes, did you have any observations that you brought up, raised your hand about?
First thing I saw was like, how much water are we wasting here? Just not reusing water in some spaces and things like that. How much energy are we wasting, not being efficient in that department? So that was the first thing I noticed. But
well, not having come from beverage, you would notice water first, right? Like, like there's a lot of liquid splashing around this place. Where's that all going? We're talking here about, sort of knowledge sharing between different sectors, people with expertise from outside of a given industry, but also knowledge sharing between breweries is really key, especially if you're really small and you feel like you're a little bit of an island. Where can, pros go outside of their own local network, the brewery next door that they always call for information and guidance in the maintenance space? Where are some resources that you all find really useful? Shout them out.
I got some answers, but I'll let the Highland crew go.
Yeah, outside of you said outside of your local kind of brewery folks.
Well, outside of the guy you always call.
Yeah, I mean, I think, to Corey's point earlier about building relationships, I think, especially in beer, it seems like everybody knows everybody. So I think starting with the guy you always call and saying, hey, who do you know about this thing? Or, who might know about this thing? And then, and kind of working it down that way. Certainly now, on the internet, there are all kinds of good resources. There are YouTube videos that you can find, just like, they'll teach you how to do stuff on your own car. There are also, good resources that you can find for maintenance in breweries, and otherwise. But definitely, personally, I reach out to folks that I know, not just locally, but folks that I've worked with in the past, folks that I trust. Former maintenance managers that I've worked with at other places that have, a breadth of experience and some knowledge in areas that, that I don't have as much knowledge about.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll add to that. Also, deep in the forums on the internet, you can find very specific things sometimes about things.
I'll say Reddit has some good
For
ones.
example, sometimes you have to take a heat. Yeah, sometimes you got to take a heat gun to a VFD to get it going.
I hope that's documented in Asset Essentials, which ones you got to do that. That's in the notes section. I'll say outside of areas, like I'm a very small town kind of person. So I like building a network and keeping people close and having those people to call. I mean, outside of that, again, it was also really cool to go to the North Carolina CBC. And again, like I was the only one that did a session on maintenance. But again, like, Whit Baker was there, Chris Creech. There's a lot of like big name people that you can just shoot the crap with about maintenance. And, they're telling me doing this is dumb, doing this is good, right? The practice they do. But then like even at the Brewers Association level, I know they have the engineering, maintenance, and safety subcommittee.
Mm-hmm.
Again, if they get that up and running and it can sponsor some content, it could just at least be another forum to have these conversations.
Yeah. Highland team, I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot as we head towards the end here, but what's a project, maintenance wise, or a system or something that's on your radar for the rest of the year that you would like to tackle? What's something that, when you have the time, and assuming there's no firefighting to be done, are there any kind of reach projects that you would like to work on for the rest of the year?
Well, would like to work on or see done are different things.
Fair enough. You can specify
actually,
which of those it is. Yeah.
So actually kind of what I said, earlier about the first thing I noticed here was how much water we are not reusing in areas that it can be reused. One of the things I'm working on right now is in our bottle filler, we have a rinse for the bottles that come in before they get filled. And that water just gets dumped on the ground like, you'd see normally. I'm trying to use that water and reroute it to rinse the bottles that come out of the filler. And I'm curious how much money that's going to save in terms of, water cost. So I've been trying to do that for the past about 6 months. So hopefully I can get around to that.
Cool. It's a great one with, obviously with also very clear sustainability benefits as well as the cost savings. Russ, any dream projects?
Yeah, I mean, we've got some irons in the fire with several of our waste streams. To Ben's point about water, there are also a couple other things that I don't necessarily want to share all the details on currently, but we've got some huge opportunity, I think, from a sustainability standpoint, and that's something that is a passion of not just our owners, and Highland as a business, but also our folks are very sustainably minded. So looking at how we can repurpose things, especially on the waste stream front, I think is going to be a super interesting project here for us throughout the rest of the year.
Excellent. Corey, any parting thoughts? I was wondering if maybe you would like to tell people about any CBC programming coming up, or anywhere else they might be able to find you when they inevitably have more questions they want to ask you.
Sure. Yeah. So we were just talking with Russ about this before. Obviously, there's usually a contingent of Highland folks that go to CBC. So myself and my team will be there. We're going to be set up in the Siemens booth in Philly. So come talk to us. Again, maybe they have some things to help you with your sustainability and waste stream monitoring as well. We can talk about maintenance. We can talk about the boring, the not sexy topic. Come see Ben, come see their team and many of the other clients that we have. We're hoping to go to a few of those locations in Philly as well. If you need to find me on LinkedIn generally. I may take a little while to reply. I don't check it very often, but that's where you can find me. Or you can go to Highland and grab a beer. And if you see Russ or Ben, then you can ask them how to get in contact with me. So, it goes around.
Excellent. And I would just, Corey, any last remarks here on these?
Sure. Yeah. Again, for those in North Carolina, there's, especially to the Raleigh area, there's the Hops for Hope. It's a fundraiser event. We engage a lot of local breweries. We partner with the different local Raleigh brewery every year. So this past year was Fainting Goat. Every year we try and do a different one, and we just have a theme and we try and do it fun, and you get to taste beer. I took my 2 girls this last time. We were in the plaza. We just had fun. Right. And who doesn't like beer? So you drink that, raise money for a great cause. And then lastly, just again, we're involved with the North Carolina Craft Brewers Guild. We have a lot of clients in a lot of other areas too, but this is our home base. So we like to support everyone in our backyard. And then, of course, I grew up in Asheville. So like when Wicked Weed was coming up and Highland was making the name, right, 25 years ago, it's just really cool to see.
Excellent. Well, it would be great to all grab a beer together at some point, ideally in the Asheville area. Ben, Corey, Russ, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise, getting other brewers and brewery employees thinking in this mindset. And again, just kind of committing to that mindset and taking those first early steps or those second big steps that'll really pay off down the road. So thank you again so much for your time. And thanks everyone who joined us today. Obviously, you know how to follow up with these folks. And yeah, thank you for joining.